for me, it's almost like the film starts to work in the same way that music works. Music is very evocative and very powerful and very emotional and suggestive, but relies upon you and your interpretation. It's not precise and specific in its storytelling.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. This episode, we are talking Todd Field's Tar.
Hey, but before we talk, Tar, if you haven't already subscribed to Deep Dive Movie Reviews, it'd be a great favor to us if you did so. And while you're there, go ahead and tap that little bell. That way you're notified every single time we drop a new video. And just as a reminder, Deep Dive Movie Reviews does contain spoilers, so you have been warned. James, let's talk Tar.
Okay, so yeah, Tar is the story of a maestro, conductor, composer, Lydia Tarr, played by Cate Blanchett, who is, incredibly well respected and regarded. She is based in Berlin, where she lives with her female partner, played by Nina Hoss, and it's kind of a portrait of her and of her, this sort of artistic genius at work. But we quickly come to realize that actually she's a bit of a monster, and events unfold involving the members of her orchestra and the students at the university where she guest lectures, and you realize that this is actually going to be some kind of a Me Too story. A sexual harassment case is brought against her, and things unfold in an increasingly strange and surreal way. Steve, this is a difficult movie to really describe to somebody, I am realizing in real time right now.
Yeah. No, it is. And, but start off by saying what a brilliant script. I mean, I'm a sucker for dialogue, and this film, I think, has one of the best scripts of any movie that I've seen this year. I'm not saying it's my favorite movie of the year, or I'm not even sure it's quite in my top 10, as much as I'm going to come out and say how much I enjoy this film. But this script is so tight. And I think Todd Field went on record saying that when he wrote it, he specifically had Cate Blanchett in mind for it. And he wouldn't have known what to do if she had said no to him, because it's so personalized, and he envisioned her as the character while he was writing this. So, and that really comes through, because this film is so layered, it's so nuanced, it's so complex. And what's brilliant about it is, if you're going to do a film in the Me Too movement, it could have been just a normal, I want to say, give me a second. If you want to do a Me Too film today, you would typically have a Harvey Weinstein white male mogul who's in a power position, and he's using his power and his influence and his intrigues to get the young girls around him. And this is the typical scenario that we're used to. What this does, what Tar does, is subvert that expectation, and instead focuses purely on women. We have a lesbian at the tower of this power pyramid who is in you mentioned partner, but actually I think in the film she says it's her wife, that they're actually married.
Right.
But she's obviously had dalliances with other females, and she can't seem to stop getting a twinkle in her eye for the newest shiny thing, which happens to always be another young girl. And so it's interesting to show that power dynamics and this kind of Machiavellian power plays are not, they're not confined to just the Harvey Weinstein white males. This is a human problem. And I think this is what makes this film just a little bit special.
Yeah, I mean, I knew very little about this film going in, deliberately so. I'd heard that it was good, but I didn't really know the details of it. And as it began, I was like, oh, this is going to be about sort of the woman in the man's world, who has fought her way to the top of this like power pyramid, as you say, which is dominated by men. When you think of conductors and when you think of maestros, I couldn't point to a single woman, although the film does a good job of highlighting some of those, not least in this sort of on-stage conversation that she's having at the beginning of in front of an audience at the beginning of the film. However, very quickly you realize that that's not what this is. This isn't a celebration of her achievements, but rather this is a portrait of just how It is not a gender specific problem, and that she
No.
is just as awful as many of the men that we have heard about in positions of power who are exploiting them. And yeah, in particular, there is a previous a student who has filed
Yeah, it wasn't a student. She had been in the orchestra. She had been one of the
right.
players and she'd had an affair with her. And when we're kind of led to believe that the affair ended, and obviously she didn't want it to end, and as what tends to happen is the one side gets desperate, starts going over the top in a desire through emails. We're led to believe
Lydia kind
attempts
of
were made.
blocked her
It's not
career
only,
prospects, didn't she?
yes, blocked her and her career prospects.
To the point where ultimately that young woman commits suicide.
Yeah.
And there is evidence out there somewhere to suggest that Lydia Tarr was to blame, and it's she discovers that there was an ongoing conversation between Lydia Tarr and her between this former girlfriend, if you like, and her current assistant, who she may or may not also have something going on with as well, and may also be kind of leading her on with the, dangling the hope of possible promotion, only to then sort of get rid of her. But I think for me, really, the standout sequence, certainly in the first half of the film, is this class that she teaches at the
Yes.
university, where I've got to be honest, it kind of caught me unawares slightly, because I think it happens early enough in the film that you're still not 100% certain whether you're watching the good guy or the bad guy.
Yeah.
If you're like, you're not 100% sure whether Lydia Tarr is a good egg or not yet. And she is teaching. She's like a guest lecturer, and she's teaching a class of music students who are drawing from all of these sort of very sort of obscure composers who represent diversity and inclusion in the current climate. These new sort of musical voices from previously unrepresented corners of the cultural landscape, if you like, at the expense of dismissing established masters like sort of Beethoven and Bach and Brahms and all the rest of it. And when challenged, the student in question, who is incredibly nervous and whose leg won't stop twitching, and immediately, as soon as you see their leg twitching, you're like, that's going to cause a problem. It's kind of like this ticking time bomb. It says, well, I'm just not really into dead white male composers, which just sort of rubs Tar up the wrong way completely and just sets her off on this this challenge to just tear this poor kid down.
Right.
But with this argument, and you're listening to her argument, and I got to be honest, I'm kind of agreeing with a lot of what she's saying and a lot of her argument.
Well, I'm totally agreeing with it, and the way it's validated and the way they validate her argument, which is not a popular position to hold today, is because she's a female lesbian making it. And if it had been a older white male guy doing it, it would have set up the normal, dichotomy. But you have a woman who is a lesbian who should be, at least you're led to believe, should be agreeing with this guy, is actually considers what he's saying a complete affront to everything she stands for. But as we're come to find out later, it really sets a stage where she's saying, we don't judge people, their personal proclivities, from the art they create, which at the end we're realizing the reason she's doing that is because she's such a bad apple, but she's so gifted and so talented, and she doesn't want anybody mixing her shortcomings with her art and her talent.
Yeah, it's the old question of separating the art from the artist. And
Right.
can you and should you? And I think we've all been guilty of it. There are certainly maybe not so much in music, but in when it comes to film, there are certain like filmmakers who I'm willing to kind of overlook certain things. Like Roman Polanski is a good example. I really like his movies.
Yeah.
But obviously, he's done bad things. But his movies are still really good, and I'm still willing to sort of enjoy his movies. But then there are other cases where I'm like, okay, no, You know, if that person has done what they've done, like a Harvey Weinstein, for example, it turns you off that whole sort of body of work that he was out there peddling. You know, and it's interesting because this comes at a time where we've just had the Sight and Sound 2022 critics poll came out, and something that struck me about the choices there was that there's sort of an overwhelming sort of deliberate effort to steer away from the established masters of cinema, if you like, almost to the point of it being sort of slightly exclusionist. You know, there were a lot of female filmmakers being represented there, a lot of you know, filmmakers of color from other countries that haven't been sort of given their due, and it was incredibly sort of diverse selection of films, but it was almost at the expense of a certain degree of film history and film, just sort of the building blocks of the art form, if you like, seemed to be absent.
The established foundations that we've kind of all come to recognize as being
that's right, and
part
many
of the history.
And many of the filmmakers that were highlighted would have been inspired by those sort of past masters, if you like. And it kind of was slightly frustrating to see, in a way, that it was kind of trying a little bit too hard to align with today's perspectives just a little bit much, at the expense of sort of dismissing 100 years worth of sort of mainstream Hollywood cinema, essentially, just because it's a bunch of old dead white dudes. And you can kind of you understand and you get it, but at the same time you're like, well, that's not really fair, I don't think. And I'm not sure that many of these filmmakers that you are putting up on a pedestal because they represent such a sort of diverse and unique perspective would actually necessarily agree with you, because they were probably influenced and inspired by a lot of the work that you are now excluding. And I think that a lot of what Lydia Tarr is saying in that sequence is kind of the same thing.
You play really well, but nowadays, white male cis composers, just not my thing.
Don't be so eager to be offended.
But in that sequence, as she's saying it, she's simultaneously showing her hand and revealing herself to be terrible, because you know why she's saying it, and she's saying it not really to say, oh, but what about Brahms? You know, you can't forget Brahms, but to tear this kid apart in front of his peers.
Well, you know, and the thing is, we've all been in that situation where somebody who knows far better than we do, we tend to shoot our mouth off about something that we think we know. And in this case, this kid thinks he knows, but he doesn't. And she's the veteran, and she's the one who knows. And I know I get frustrated sometimes when I get people, and again, drawing from my religious background, when somebody will say something that they just heard in a church service last week, as if it was, you know, this is the way it is. And then I just think, you haven't really processed that. You haven't really thought about what you're saying. And in case this is what Cate Blanchett is saying to the student, what you're saying is just something you read in an article this week. You should feel this way. You should feel this way because you're a non-binary music, and this is what you should be supporting. This is what you should be affirming. But you just came to that conclusion without any serious depth and consideration and reflection on the foundations of what I'm trying to teach you in this class. And so I was certainly siding with the Cate Blanchett character in that, because I've been in similar situations with that on other topics. And so I was like, yeah, Kate, give it to him. But in hindsight, like you said, you realize she's setting it all up for, and I don't know if she was specifically doing it intentionally, because we've been referring to her as a bad person, a bad apple, but in her mind, I don't think she sees that herself that way. I'd say she probably sees herself as a flawed individual, but you know, there's a measure. And this is another thing I enjoyed about Todd Field's take on this film, is it could have been much more sensational. There could have been a lot more sex. There could have been a lot more of, you know, trysts in back corners. And there could have been a level of erotica in this film by the nature of the source that the material we're looking at. And yet it's surprisingly chaste, considering.
Oh, sure. Yes. Considering it's about sort of sexual exploitation of other characters. Yeah, no, it is. And it's almost kind of
This
surreal.
is the opposite of blonde. This is the opposite of,
Yes.
this is the anti-blonde, you know?
That's a very good call. Yeah, but there's also something sort of surreal, almost kind of dreamlike about how the film is constructed and presents itself. Certainly as you get into the second half, you know, and sort of almost like the walls of reality sort of threaten to, as her world crumbles around her, you know, as she is becoming exposed, and you know, the community, the musical community around her and the education community are dealing with sort of the aftermath of her behavior and her pattern of behavior as it all comes out. I think the film does a really sort of good job of sort of disorienting you and making you start to question exactly what is happening and what you're seeing and what you're experiencing, and how much of this is real and how much of this is imaginative. You know, she starts almost getting sort of haunted in her beautiful cavernous home that she has. You know, strange things, literally sort of bumps in the, you know, scratching in the cupboards, you know, start sort of occurring, and you're realizing that, you know, how much of this is real, how much of this is just literally her conscience threatening to her guilt threatening to sort of finally be heard and finally sort of break out. And for me, it's almost like the film starts to work in the same way that music works. You know, music is very evocative and very powerful and very emotional and suggestive, but relies upon you and your interpretation. It's not precise and specific in its storytelling.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the film starts doing the same thing. It starts becoming increasingly sort of abstract and more sort of evocative and surreal, as I said. And I think that is a kind of deliberately, it's almost trying to make the film behave in the way that music behaves, I think.
Yeah. There's definitely her mental state begins to, you're absolutely right, because she begins to see patterns. She starts to have dreams, nightmares. Even when she's awake, she's seeing things around her in almost like a beautiful mind, and not to that degree with Russell Crowe, but she's starting to see patterns that she's relating back to the girl that's committed suicide. But I was going to say is this movie is also a great case study on why we make the decisions we make, because she's highly successful. She's reached the top of the pyramid. She has a loving home. You know, she's married to the Nina Hoss character, who is conveyed as this grounded, loving, lifetime companion wife that wants to have a relationship to the end of time with her. They have a beautiful adopted daughter. Things should be okay in Lydia Tarville, and yet she can't seem to ignore the shiny objects in her life.
And there's a suggestion that Nina Hoss's character Sharon is at least partly aware and accepting of who Lydia Tarr is and what Lydia Tarr does.
And not just Nina Hoss, but the entire ensemble. They all know that she has these proclivities, that she engages in transactional relationships with people, that she shows favoritism. And this is something you see in authoritarian structures everywhere. This is not something that, you know, this is why we need transparency in different forms of government and organizations, because this is what people tend to do. I love the line at one point when she says there hasn't been a transactional, you've never had a non-transactional relationship in your life except for your daughter. That's the only non-transactional relationship. Even your relationship with your wife is transactional in nature in her mind.
That's what I really want to talk about, actually, is just to jump right to it, is the end of the movie.
Yeah.
You know, and how it ends and what it means, because I've seen a lot of discussion online about the last kind of act, if you like, the last movement, the last sort of half an hour of the film, and what it's trying to say. And for me, I mean, and I've seen some takes on the film saying that it's almost like we shouldn't take it on face value at all, and that from the moment that she falls down and breaks her face, everything after that is kind of a dream or something. And I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I wouldn't go there. Yeah.
And I think it's actually slightly more depressing. I think it's because I think we've seen it all too many times recently, is that even in the aftermath of a scandal like this, there will always be an appreciative audience for someone who has been declared a genius
Pariah. Oh
or
yeah,
an artist. Yeah, the other way around.
yeah, right.
They might be chased out of a certain community, but they'll always find, like someone like Kevin Spacey, for example.
Mhm.
He's no longer going to book the big jobs in Hollywood, but he goes under for a
Mhm.
year or two, and then he resurfaces and he's getting work again in other
Yeah,
countries and what have you. And there will always be,
that's a good
you know,
example.
there
That's a
will
good.
always there'll always be people who still appreciate him, who's still like, wow, that's two-time Academy Award winner Kevin
Mhm.
Spacey, and he is an accomplished actor, and we'll if we can have a live audience with him, then
Yeah,
great,
yeah.
and I think that those final sequences in the film, even though that she's have to sort of shift and adjust, that she's now conducting for live performances of sort of video game music. That final performance
Yeah.
where she's playing to a bunch of cosplayers. I think it's from the video game called Monster Hunter, I
Yeah,
believe.
yeah.
I admit I didn't know at the time, but I looked it up. I was like, that's obviously something that I should know what it is, but I don't. And I looked it up, and she's conducting a live performance of video game music to an appreciative and enthusiastic audience somewhere else in the world.
Right.
So she will still be able to find work and find a pedestal upon which
Yeah.
she can
Yeah.
stand and conduct and be appreciated. And that's the tragic truth, I think.
Quick question about the end, because I'm unsure about something. I wanted to get your interpretation. When she goes in for the massage
Mm.
and she says, "Oh, can you, pick a girl from the fishbowl?" And he's like, "Fishbowl? What?" And she goes, and it's obviously set up like an orchestra with the numbers.
Yeah.
And she sees the girl look up. And I think that's supposed to represent the Russian celloist. I think that was her position. I'm
Yes.
trying to decide, was she responding to that and went outside and vomited? Or was she starting to realize that she only engaged with relationships with people as like numbers or as objects, or as she would just choose? I don't know if she's having a moment of like, I've looked in the mirror and I am a shit, or is she just kind of missing the relationship she's like, I'm trying to figure out why she came out and had that vomit reaction.
The way I interpreted it is that this is essentially just a recontextualization of what she did. And for her, it was always, like you said, a transactional relationship or a power play. And that, yes, that girl, that masseuse number 5, was sitting in the exact same spot where the young Russian cellist or whatever was sitting. But when confronted with essentially a situation very similar to what she was doing back home, but where it's all completely above board and where it's completely condoned and it's completely legitimized, as it is in this massage parlor, she suddenly sort of sees it for what it is and is appalled by the situation, that she's used to doing it in such a different context where she is completely in control of it, and it's all
Right.
about the power dynamics involved with her choosing, and her, because there's a prize element, I think,
Mm-hmm.
to whoever it is that she selects.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think when it's recontextualized, like it is in this massage parlor,
Mm-hmm.
she realizes how so she's the vulnerable one. She's the one
Right,
completely out
right.
of place, and that's how I read it. It was just it was
Okay. Yeah.
kind of her response to it being recontextualized
Right.
in a situation where she is no longer in control of it.
Yeah. And it makes me think also too, where we get a bit of a peephole into what made her the person she is, because when
Mm,
she kind of falls off the wagon and she has nowhere to go and she's been cast out of the high society which she has become accustomed, she goes back home. And and obviously she comes from a much more humble beginnings, not poverty, but obviously like lower middle class, small house, and we learn through her brother, who doesn't really give her the time of day, who kind of knows her for what she is, that she's not actually Lydia Tarr. She originally started out as Linda Tarr. And so what's conveyed is she, through sheer determination, she was able to elevate herself into the top levels of a structure of which women usually are not, they don't reach those levels. So we're dealing with a woman with a lot of indomitable spirit, and she made herself. She's a self-made woman. I would have liked even more of a little backstory of what made her who she is, because that peephole was just a teaser, but I thought it was done very well, and it was well placed.
Yeah, because there's clearly been some kind of pretty drastic reinvention has gone along at some time. So I think even her surname was spelt differently. I mean, here it's spelt the same way as the film is. It's T-A-R with an accent on the A, just to add it a little bit of European elegance and gravitas. Whereas no, she was Linda Tarr with a double R, and she's done everything she can to distance herself from that existence and from that person to become this kind of very sophisticated musical genius. And I think that would have been interesting to have seen a little bit more of that, because there's an element of self-loathing to it as well. That she's somehow ashamed of who she is. She's very aware of her own humble beginnings, her own inadequacies, if you like. And you could see that perhaps everything that she's doing is she's prying on those young people with the same sense of drive and ambition that obviously got her to where she is.
Which begs the question of who was transacting with her when she was up and coming. And maybe this is the model that she knows. This is what she has been. Normally when people get to that position, it's because they deal with the world in that way. It's because that's the way the world has dealt with them.
Yeah, quite honestly, hurt people.
Yeah,
in its simplest form. Yeah,
exactly. Well, James, if we draw it to a close, we need to have a final score for Todd Field's Tar. What instrument of measurement are we going to use?
Well, we could use a conductor's baton.
Let's do it. I think that's one of the quickest decisions we've ever come to.
Yeah, normally this is a struggle.
How many maestro's batons would you award this film?
Well, I mean, I really, really like this movie. I really responded to it. I was challenged by it, and I really appreciate a movie that asks more of me than simply to sit through it. And this left me with more questions than answers. And it's a film that has really sort of stuck with me. It's been a couple of weeks since I saw it now, and it's really kind of ruminated in my mind. Particularly sort of the second half of it, as to what it all means, what it's trying to say. And then there are definitely sort of sequences in it that have really stuck with me. I think Cate Blanchett is absolutely fantastic. I think what Todd Field has done with the film's sort of soundscape, as well as with the sort of the visuals as well, he's created something sort of really interesting, sort of deceptively complex in its sort of technical assembly. And I think it's a movie that I will go back to and I will watch again, just to try and solve the puzzle, if you like. It feels like a little bit of a kind of riddle going on there that I haven't quite fully unpacked. This conversation has certainly helped, but there's still little elements in there. It's right up there. I think it is sort of knocking on the door of my top 10 of the year. And so I'm between a 4 and a 5. And I don't give halves, which has left me slightly conflicted as to where we go. I'm going to say 4 batons out of 5, but a very, very, very strong 4.
Yeah. Oh, no, fair enough. For me, like I said, I think this is one of the tightest, best scripts of the year. I love the dialogue. I love it's very tight, it's very deep, it's very complex, and some of the exchanges between people were Sorkian in their way of it's assuming you're a smart person and that you have a working knowledge of certain elements. And granted, I don't when it comes to music. So some of the dialogue I really liked because I know I should be liking it more if I understood what that term meant, but I don't know what it means. But
Yeah,
it's
it
said
never
with
talks
it,
down to you like that, does it?
no, it doesn't explain things to you. And that's what I've always, among other things, why I love Sorkin. Sorkin will have two people talking really fast about an area of expertise. And they don't say, oh, and by the way, for all of you dummies that are out there watching this, this is what we really mean. It never does that in the film. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that it assumes that I have a working intelligence and I'll figure this out. And so between that and Cate Blanchett's performance, the fact that it subverts expectations about a film that is addressing a Me Too type situation and the power dynamics that go along with it, I could speak for another half an hour on authoritarianism and all the elements there, but I won't. So like yourself, this film is knocking on the door of my top 10. I don't know if it's quite in there, but I'm going to give it 4.5 because I can give half. And it's not quite a 5 for me, but I love this film and really can highly recommend it.
Excellent.
Good. Well, that's what James and I think about Todd Field's Tar, but what do you think? We'd love to start a conversation with you about it. Feel free to drop a comment in the box below. We are on social media on Twitter and Instagram, so you can find links to finding that in the links below. James?
So I'd really like to hear what people thought about Sight and Sound's top 100 films of all time, their critics poll particularly. This film made me think of that poll. I'd be very curious as to what you thought of those choices, of those selections. Are they representative of how you feel about the history of cinema? Do you think there were some notable omissions there? Please let us know in the comments.
You got me. I'm going to go check that out now. I'm sure it's available easy enough to find in the internet. I'll try to put a link. I'll try to put a link when we put this up. So, anyhow, until next episode.
Goodbye.
You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.